Calamari Salutations everyone, Squid here bringing you the power rankings for the week 5 of the YCL. And this week was actually a really spicy one because many coaches that weren't expected won. And when you do the power rankings, that actually means it's a good headache to have because it's the kind of week that can actually spark a discussion as to where people stand on the power rankings. Also because the level of performance in the league isn't that far apart from each other. It happens that a few coaches are so evenly matched that it's actually kind of hard to rank them, but it will be fun to do them this week. And to start off the week, we have the Connecticut Soul Rocks, a new team that came in after the Brisbane Real Boomers and Just JH Cry Raged left the league. When I look at the roster, they picked up the Landers T that was actually left behind by the Nashville Nido Kings. And I like the Landers T with the Rotom Heat. It will basically fill the same role that Zygarde was feeling in the sense that it's a powerful ground move attacker. It's not as good as Zygarde in what it can do and its versatility, but it's still Landorus T. I mean, come on, who hasn't suffered at the hands of Landorus T? I like the roster they've put up together. That Weavile offensive ice typings are often looked off as not as good, but Ice is a really good offensive type, so I'm looking forward to see how the Weavile stands out. The pick that I decided to highlight was actually the Taurus, because people keep telling me that Taurus is really good, and I just haven't seen it utilized that well, so I'm looking forward to see a Taurus sweep. I don't know, maybe something like that. And we're moving on into the number 15, and the number 15 is the second newcomer to the league, Patmac, and the Sacramento Sandslash. They lost a 0-1 loss this week, despite the score saying it's 0-3. It's because of item clause breaking, but the match played out as a 0-1. Basically, the match was decided when Patmac decided to not click Draco Meteor in front of the Electivire, and he clicked Psyshock, and Psyshock missed the KO. And what happened next is that Electivire put Latios in range of Aqua Jet, and basically Latios was unable to clinch the win for Patmac in the game. But if Patmac actually won the game, it was because of the Latios. Latios applied so much pressure during the game, and it could have netted him the win, but unfortunately didn't. So that's why he sits at the bottom of the standings. It's as much as a surprise to me as it probably is to you that Aldra is right now sitting at the 14th spot of the power rankings. The thing is, things just haven't clicked for Aldra this season. He was really unfortunate in 2 weeks. One of them, you could argue that he was running a bad move and was punished because of it. The other was a straight up crit in a 1 in 8 chance, so I don't know how that one goes. Usually when people have issues outside of the game, it reflects in game. That's just how it is. We're all human, and real life is actually more important than Pokemon. Aldra's real life is really making him lag behind on the Pokemon scene, and that's just reflecting on the results he's brought. This week, the most strange thing was him running a Choice Scarf Garchomp, and when he could have locked himself into Earthquake, he chose to lock himself into Dragonclaw instead, and that struck me as an odd decision. Yeah, it just comes to show that despite being a good player, if your mind isn't fully focused on the game, you're just gonna have a rough time, and that's how it is. So as for Aldra, I wish him all the best, and I wish him to get over whatever he's going through. Next up, we have the Cold Summer Assassins, the team that actually beat Aldra. And that matchup was really a beauty to see. It put in so much work against Aldra's team and managed to tank the Scarf Garchomp, and then was just able to clean up house in the late game. Yeah, that's basically not much to say. The match played out really nicely on the Cold Summer Assassin side. And I think the key move of the game was actually the turn where Aldra managed to clinch the rocks without them being defogged away by a pheasant. And when that happens, the switches that Aldra made were just getting chipped, and the rocks damage actually stacked up really nicely at the end of the game with all the switching that Aldra did with the U-turns. And that was a really good play by Souza on recognizing that he did need the rocks up on the field. So props to Souza for recognizing that, and props to Souza for getting his first win of the season. And in this 12th spot we have the commissioner himself, CINE, and CINE did try to surprise Monte with the lead of Piloswine with Choppleberry, and it worked nicely because in the first turn the Marowak was flinched, so it was a free KO at that point. And then the switch on the Lycanroc Tusk with that Choppleberry procced. It was beautiful and managed to surprise Monte really nicely. And with the Icicle Crash, it just ended up KOing the Lycanroc Tusk. So a really good lead by CINE, leading the Piloswine, chipping down a Mon and getting the KO on a very important offensive Mon in Lycanroc Tusk. Unfortunately, that's where good things stop for CINE in the battle. He managed to fail to preserve his safety nets against the Cloyster. First of all, he let the Klefki go down really soon in the battle. The Piloswine also went down right after the KOing the Lycanroc, and the nail in the coffin was actually when he brought in the Zero War Witch's Scarf to take a knockoff from Mandibuzz, and when that happened he basically had no way to stop the Cloysters, so Monte just capitalized on that beautifully. Next up we have Cherrymentary. In the 11th spot, the Philadelphia Melmetals finally got their first win on the board. It was a 5-0 victory, which was really convincing. Cherry managed to take advantage of some passivity and missed hurricanes in the beginning of the match to actually preserve two of his very important mons in Ferrothorn and Dredigon. The Dredigon actually went down to the Zapdos next, but it still got a lot of HP back. But I think Cherry actually won the match when he stayed in on the Jellicent in front of the Zapdos, and it takes balls to do that. And he surfed on a predicted roost, and then he immediately switched out into the Jolteon. And Jolteon was Focus Sash, and because the Zapdos clicked Thunderbolt, even with the Rock Chip he managed to preserve his Sash intact, and then the Jolteon just went nuts. I'm so happy to finally see him utilize Jolteon, and Jolteon went nuts on Sharky's team and just clinched him a very important victory, the first one. Playoff hopes are still alive for this team. They are slim, fair, but never give up until the end of the season. So props to Cherry for his first win. And speaking of Sharky, he's actually in the number 10 spot. He was honestly plagued by a little bit of misses from the Hurricane in the beginning of the match, and also the passivity that he displayed to let Dredigon reach such a high health after being chipped so much. Honestly, the only play I downright disagree is actually not clicking Heatwave in front of the Ferrothorn the first time. It was predicted that the Zapdos would have Heatwave, and if you manage to catch Cherry off guard by the Heatwave, it would actually be great. He had the Protect so he could scout, but nonetheless, I think you have to apply that pressure so that the Ferrothorn can actually stay in on the Zapdos and has to immediately switch out, and you can potentially gain some turns from there. But staying in and roosting as you gave HP back to the Dredigon was actually the other play I downright disagree. The Dredigon was almost dead and you just gave him enough HP that it could actually be a threat once again. But after that, I think you didn't make that many mistakes. I think that the rest of the game just played out beautifully for Cherry, mainly because of that ballsy play that he did that paid off big time. In the 9th spot, we have the Goat Killer. We have Arts with his Rustboro City rejects, and this was a weird ending, gotta say. The Urshifu just went nuts after setting up a bulk up, and to be fair, Bishmi did make a misplay, and that's why the Urshifu managed to clinch the win for the Rustboro City rejects. Other thing that was mentioned in the clean sweep was the Rillaboom being Grassy Seeds and U-turn. You're getting a boost from the Grassy Seeds and then you're immediately U-turning out to get rid of Sad's boost. So that's a decision that I probably wouldn't make. And as for the rest of the game, that that switching on the Corphagrigus on the Alolan Executor was funny to see, but at the same time there weren't many switches that you had. Probably the Crobat was the best one because it quad resisted the Leaf Storm. But after that, yeah, you managed to catch the ball that Bishmi dropped off from the later stages of the match. So props to Arts for getting the 3-0 victory thanks to that Urshifu. And thanks to Bishmi. Next up, we have the CINE 6. And despite winning 6-0 this week, I decided to bump down the CINE 6 one spot. One, because of merit from the opponent. And 2, because I really don't know how the match would have played out if Sidon actually missed 1 or 2 Magma Storms. So Magma Storm is actually 75% accurate, and Sidon hit 7 of those. Lucas was really trying to stall out the Magma Storms, and I agree with that play. Magma Storm is expected to miss at least once, so stalling out the Magma Storms is actually a good way to counter that. But at the same time, Sidon managed to capitalize on the bulky and more passive team that Lucas built, because he got rid of the most offensive threat on the second turn of the battle. Third, props to Sidon for capitalizing on the team that the opponent built. I just think that both coaches should have recognized that the match would be quite stally, and setting up rocks sooner rather than later would have benefited both coaches. So it's just the other thing that I really didn't like in the match. The rocks would have been great earlier. Sidon still has some things that he could improve upon, and he's kind of been hit or miss for me this season. So that's why I decided to put another coach in front of him, because the other coach has been a little bit more consistent, and that coach is actually the Nashville Nidokings. And first of all, I just want to say I want to wish all the best to Southside Braves. He's going through a rough time, and I want to give him props because despite being through a rough time, he's actually managing to still find the time to battle his opponents, and he managed to win this week despite going through sad rough times. And the way he did it was mainly using Choice Band Azumarill, which put in so much work against the Sacramento Sandslashes. The Copperajah was actually burned early in the match, so he could have used the Copperajah as a sack instead of the Groudon at one point of the match. But despite that, the Azumarill with the Choice Band Aqua Jet just put in so much work against the Sacramento Sandslashes team, and the play at the end, the Runrigos actually took away the huge power from the Azumarill, and Braves had the cool collected thoughts of setting down and going into the Amoonguss and sacking the Amoonguss in order to preserve that huge power and managing to get the necessary firepower to KO the Latias, who was on a low HP range. So props to Braves for winning that match, and I wish you all the best through all the tough times that you were going through. Next up, we have the Hellblaze Volcaronas. They dropped off one spot this week, and they are still sitting in front of Sidon despite losing to them. My main reason is that despite the 2 losses, Lucas has felt more consistent than Sidon, and he had some pretty convincing wins. On the other hand, I think Lucas made his biggest misplay of the season, and it's by far. So it's the first major mistake that I've seen him making. and it's actually setting up with a Dragapult on the turn 1. I don't agree with that play at all. The Heatran, the Vaporeon were always physical walls that could check the Dragapult, so I really don't feel like it was the play to make. And also the Tapu Lele was kind of expected to be Scarf in order to outspeed the Dragapult, so I really don't feel like that was the play to make, especially in front of the Tapu Lele. Maybe you could try and make it later down the line where things are chipped enough and the Tapu Lele is actually not sitting on the field. That said, because you lost the Dragapult, the rest of the team was actually quite passive and lacked some of offensive pressure. But I still liked seeing the Mr. Rime putting in work. Tanked a fair bit enough of Magma Storms, even though it's super effective. It just comes to show how much of a special wall the Mr. Rime can be. But fortunately, the Magma Storms just didn't miss, and there's just those games where the opponent uses inaccurate moves and they just don't miss. And unfortunately for Lucas, this was that game and he couldn't gain momentum from the missing moves, and unfortunately he just went down to the Tapu Lele in the late game, and the 6-0 victory for CINE was actually consummated. I just want to say better luck next week, really. There's not much else to say. After the mistake from the beginning of the match, I think Lucas just tried to play the best that he could. The only fault I make in said play is actually not recognizing that rocks were gonna be really important for that game. Besides that, I think that Lucas played the best that he could with the tools that he had available at the moment. Next up, we have the GOAT, the best of all time, Bishmi, and he lost to Arts, who actually named him the GOAT. So I don't know how that dynamic pans out, but the thing is, I like the Alolan's Executor very much. With that Choice Specs, Leaf Storm just wrecked two of Arts' Mons. Unfortunately for Bishmi, he was in a really good position, but he made two crucial mistakes. The first one was actually getting the Rocky Helmet knocked off from the Corviknight, because that would have actually been really good chip on the Urshifu. And the second one, and the most important one, was actually not going into Galarian Rapidash sooner rather than later, because even if the Rapidash didn't KO the Urshifu couldn't heal off of it, and that meant that Bishmi could later revenge the Rapidash with the Darmanitan, because Darmanitan always hits like a truck, despite Urshifu being at +1 defense. So that's basically the mistake that lost Bishmi the game, because until that point he was playing really good. Sacking the Rhyperior with the Dracozolt still on the field was maybe a questionable play, but I don't know. At the same time, Bishmi did have some resists. Unfortunate that Bishmi didn't go into the Rapidash sooner, because he could have actually be sitting at the top of his division at this point. So I think that mistake will plague him many nights to come. In the number 4 spot, we have the man, the myth, the legend, Slurpuff. Actually, it's Venfun, and he managed to beat the Austin Taurus, maybe against all odds, but Sven has really been improving steadily throughout the season. And it's been amazing to see that despite him losing to Bishmi on the first week, he just improved steadily, and he's now sitting at the top of the standings in the 4th spot. And let me say that between the 4th place and the 1st place, there's actually not that huge of a difference in skill gap. It's actually really close between these 4 coaches. Debatably, you could put any of those coaches in any order, and I wouldn't feel ashamed by that. It just comes to show that at the top of the league there's some really cool competition going on, and the skill gap isn't actually skewed. So props to Sven for cementing himself as one of the top coaches of the league right now. Sitting at 4-1, he's tied with Bishmi and Sally. About the Slurpuff. The Slurpuff was a beauty to see. It was played beautifully. He played the best that he could with the information that he had available, but the Slurpuff broke Sally's team so much. Sally really didn't have a clear answer to it, and it came to show in the amount of work that the Slurpuff came to provide. It actually rendered the Cinderace basically useless because Sven Thun had no need for it to break the opposing team. Another thing that I liked about Sven was having Shadow Claw instead of the Poltergeist to counteract a possible no item on the Bronzong. That was actually a beautiful play prep-wise. And the cherry on top was actually the Slowbro Galar with the Air Balloon to counteract the Sceptile, and with the quick draw to actually let him net the win. But the main thing that the Slowbro did was actually stopping the Sceptile sweep, and it was really important because without it the Sceptile would have actually swept. So props to Sven for thinking out on that set, and if he keeps winning, he probably will just rise up on the standings. So watch out for Sven. He's definitely a contender at this point for the championship. So be on your toes because Sven is going for it. In the number 3 spot in the podium this week, we have the Cerulean City Mewtwo, and I think it was actually the worst performance of the Cerulean City Mewtwo. That's why they dropped off a spot, and actually because the other coach has been playing amazingly. And the main thing I didn't like this week was actually how unprepared he was for that Trevenant. The Trevenant really did put an amazing amount of work on the Cerulean City Mewtwo's, and the best switch in was actually the Miltank, but the Miltank was taking Drain Punches at the same time, so it was a really difficult choice for the Cerulean City Mewtwo to not have a clear way to break through that Trevenant. That said, at the end they did manage to do it, and switching all the switching around on the Trevenant had such a good coverage against the 6 months that Luke Harry brought to the match, and he was so chipped down by the Trevenant that only switching out from the Araquanid after setting up an Ira Defense was actually the healing grace, because it got the Milotic back with his Flame Orb boost, and he managed to recover HP on it. So it was a really good turn of events there that actually managed for the Milotic to just be able to wall the Trevenant from that point onwards. That said, Luke Harry did have the cool tech with the Choice Scarf Whimsicott to KO the Mienshao turn 1. And that's actually what allowed the Miltank to shine, because without the Mienshao gone, the Miltank wouldn't have been allowed to sit on the field for a very long time as it did in this match. And the Miltank was just spreading paralysis down the line, was able to tank a lot of moves from the opposing side. So props to the Miltank. I'm looking forward to see Luke Harry's performance in the final 2 weeks, and he's in my books. He's also definitely a contender. The 4 top spots of these power rankings at this point are the main contenders for the championship in my point of view, so I'm looking forward to see how his run is going to pan out. In the number 2 spot, similarly to last season, is the Immunity Idol sitting comfortably in the first place of their league, and the Silvally put in such an amazing amount of work again. The Silvally has been amazing for Monte this season, and he's been utilizing him beautifully. He's taken away the rocks from the field this week. He's basically KO'd the Klefki downright, so not a very important thing that he did. Monte just capitalized on having a really solid game plan in sweeping with the Cloyster, and just checking all the boxes that he needed in order for the Cloyster to sweep. So he did all that, and once everything was checked out, he switched in the Cloyster and just swept. And there was nothing that Sen could have made at that point, because he just let the main answers of Cloyster be chipped down and be removed. That's basically the story of the game. Monte is playing amazingly throughout the season, and he's been, despite his week 1 fluke, once he revamped the roster, he's been really consistent and putting out really strong performances throughout the season. And in the number 1 spot, despite losing, I still have the Austin Taurus. And the thing is, Sally at this point had a really solid buffer in scariness towards the rest of the league, especially towards the top of the league. Now that he's lost that buffer. In my book, that doesn't knock him off the first place, although he did have a sketchy performance this week. So first of all, he had not a clear way to deal with that Slurpuff set that put him such an amazing amount of work against him. Second of all, miscalculating the damage from the Rock Slide on the Dragonite was also a mistake, because he could have set up one Dragon Dance or maybe two, and he could have put himself in a stronger position that he had at the end of the game. So the Tapu Koko really did put in some work. Most importantly of said work is KOing the Slurpuff, but then Sally did a weird play where he stayed in Thunderbolting the Landorus when he was locked into the Thunderbolt, so bit of a question mark there. Oh, and by the way, I still have to mention the overconfidence. Bronzong staying in on the Delmise set an important pace to the match once the Bronzong was actually down. A really weird performance out of Sally. I'll not bash him too hard because one, Sven is one of the top contenders of the league and he did play amazingly. Two, because what I said at the beginning, we can forget this week happened because it was Sally's worst performance, but at the same time I expecting to bounce back next week, so we'll see how that one goes. So this is what the power rankings look like at the moment. The Austin Taurus still sitting in the first place. The Immunity Idols now in their second place. Cerulean City Mewtwo in third place. And with Sven in the fourth place, it's actually the four most scary top of the league coaches at the moment. In the second half, gotta give my praises to Sherry Mancake because he managed to climb 3 spots this week, and it's well deserved after his very convincing first win. That's it. It was honestly a matter of time until he got it. This concludes the video for this week. Thank you guys for watching the video. Don't forget to leave a like, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you on the next one. Squid jetting out.